Okay, one of the first things I would like to talk about is the coding standards for this course. I think you'll find that each language that you learn has certain general accepted practices. A lot of them have some things in common about how they do things. Some, it might be little nuanced differences, but I want to go through and talk about what are the standards specific to this course. And these standards are going to be throughout the entire semester that I will look for things like this. So I expect you to read this. I'm not going to read it line for line and bore you on a video for that, but I just want to point out a few things. One of the most important things is when we look at code, we want to be able to read it. The computer doesn't really need to have readability. It just needs syntax. It needs the code to just run right. It doesn't need to actually read it like humans do. But we're human. When we look at programming, we want it to be readable. So as we go through, you'll see that we'll use different methods to make that thing as readable as possible. So as we go through, and that's one of the things I'll look at with your code to make it as simple and we call it elegant code. That's one of the things you want to strive for is elegance in your programming. So first, indentation. You'll see how we'll use indents to organize columns and things in our code. Line length. No one likes scrolling left to right like crazy. So we want to make sure we have our line length so it fits on the screen. Comments. You'll hear me harp on this throughout the course. Comment, comment, comment. I've taken over projects before from other developers where they have not named variables and parts of their code correctly, and they've not commented, and it's taken me a ton of time to figure out what the code is doing, because it can be convoluted with more complex codes, complex programs. So you're going to want to comment and have good documentation as you do it. When you get more depth at developing, you will even be able to do what's called self-documenting code. I come from the Java side of the fence, and so as opposed to the C#, so I can't speak to the C# specifics, but the Java side, we do some self-documenting code and can create documents from our build process on the fly with our different classes and things. So you're going to want to write as many comments as you can so that you will save the sanity of the developer that picks up that project and maybe even your own. There are times you might work on a project and then put it down and then come back and work on that project 6 months to a year later. You want to understand what you did. If you're like me, you kind of forget that stuff, so having comments helps you out. And then how do we declare variables? We'll learn more about variables as we go through the course. I think we bring those up in Learning Plan 2, but they need to follow a certain syntax. So we want to make sure we name our variables appropriately, not arbitrarily. They need to make sense what the variables are. And then how do we name things? Naming convention. There's some rules there as far as how you name stuff, and in the early days it was very cryptic. We don't have to deal with that anymore, and what a lot of developers use is what's called camel case. So for example, I have my first name variable. It's called camel case because it's a compound word and the first letter of the second word is capitalized, so it's like a hump of a camel. So it is camel case. And so we want to name things that make sense. I know by looking at my variable first name, I know exactly what data is going in there. It's the first name. So we want to make sure that we understand what our variables are and naming them appropriately. Semicolons. In a lot of programming languages, and JavaScript is no exception, you have what are called line terminators or line delimiters, and that signifies what is the end of a line of code or a statement per se. And so we use semicolons to do that. So you're going to want to put semicolons at each end of every line. Now, there are times, JavaScript is what's called a loosely typed language, so there are times when it will forgive not having a semicolon, but there are also times it doesn't forgive when you forget a semicolon, and your program may not work the way you expect it. So you just get in the habit of putting a semicolon at the end of every statement, line of code, and that'll be helpful. There are some minor exceptions to this rule, but for the most part, you want a semicolon. And then statements of how you do things. Now, this is up for some debate in today's coding environment, where you might see var name Fred, and then you wouldn't have the second var, you'd have Sid equals Madison all in one line. I've seen that. This is usually not how you do it, where you have a var, two vars on the same line. Each statement It comes down to this. Each statement of code needs to be on its own line. Now, would this work, this one right here that's the wrong way? Yes, it would. It would work, but it's not done correctly to standards. The bottom part here is how it should be. Now you'll learn what, it's not so important now that you understand what document.write and stuff is. You'll learn that pretty quickly, but just know that each statement needs to be on its own line. Var, just as a side note, is a way of declaring a variable. And then white space, use white space as much as possible to make it readable, meaning don't clump things a bunch all over together. If you use white space, it makes it easier to read your code. If you have any questions on coding standards, don't hesitate to ask, and I'll do what I can to help you out. Happy coding!